Good Tuesday, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for November the 1st. We have made it to month number 11 of this year in our daily Bible reading. I'm thankful that you have tuned in today, and I hope that you have enjoyed the first 10 months of our reading together. I hope it has really benefited you and that it has helped you to become more familiar with Scripture, specifically as we've been reading through the prophets earlier in the year, which is a text that most of us are probably a bit unfamiliar with. It's just very different from what we find within the New Testament, and it is probably a little more difficult for us to comprehend as 21st century Western readers. But I hope that it was beneficial to you, and I hope that what we're doing to finish out the year, reading through Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, is beneficial for you as well, and encouraging you in your faith and giving you some things to think about as we go throughout our day. We want to be a people who are focused on things above, on things pertaining to God as much as we can be. And I think just reading the Bible on a daily basis gives us a lot to think about. So we're reading here today in Job chapter 27, which is the second half of Job's response to Bildad, the last of the speeches delivered by Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Here in chapter 27 is the second half of that response. And then once we move on from here, we're really going to get into the closing statements. Chapter 28 is subheaded as a hymn of wisdom. We'll talk about that some tomorrow. And then the closing arguments begin in chapter 29, and we'll look at that in 29, 30, and 31. But here we are in Job 27, and the text tells us that Job continued his discourse saying this: as God lives, who has deprived me of justice, and the Almighty who has made me bitter, as long as my breath is still in me, and the breath from God remains in my nostrils, my lips will not speak unjustly, and my tongue will not utter deceit. I will never affirm that you are right. I will maintain my integrity until I die. I will cling to my righteousness and never let it go. My conscience will not accuse me as long as I live. Here again, Job is recognizing, because he just made the argument for the sovereignty of God in the previous text of Job chapter 6, saying that he is all-knowing, all-powerful, he controls everything. Therefore, it is a little paradoxical almost that Job is going to use the breath that God gives him in order to speak about the kind of the way that God has hurt him, but he's going to use that to also speak about his innocence. Remember, Job here, he recognizes, and he's going to recognize, or has recognized, is, and will recognize that God is in control. He recognized that anything that happened to him is not done outside of God's control. Therefore, his thinking at this point is, he has deprived me of justice, because justice would mean that Job would not have suffered what he had suffered, because he was a righteous and blameless man. He's made Job bitter for the things that he suffered through. And yet, even with these things being the case, Job is not going to speak unjustly. He's not going to utter deceit. And he's definitely not going to affirm that the arguments of his friends are correct. He's going to maintain his integrity. He's going to cling to his righteousness, and his conscience is going to be clean. Job knows he is innocent. He knows that. He knows that he is not receiving justice for some wrong that he has done. That doesn't negate the fact that he sees this as God depriving him, or God making him bitter. Again, if he understands that God is behind everything, then that is the case in some way. And there's some understanding there. But he's just not going to go where his friends are going, saying that he's being punished for what he's done. Job says, I'm not going to do that. Some would see this as, and I'm sure his friends saw this, as Job just being stubborn. And certainly that can be the case. Sometimes people are unwilling to confess and acknowledge their wrongs because they're stubborn and they're arrogant and they refuse to acknowledge that they've done something wrong. But that simply is not Job here. Job is being honest. He says, I've not done anything wrong to bring about this type of behavior. I'm going to continue to talk. I'm going to continue to plead with God. I'm going to continue to wrestle out loud with what I'm enduring. and I'm not going to go where you're going. I'm not going to admit that you're right because you are wrong. So he's going to contrast that now with the godless person who might cry out to God. Remember, this entire text, Job is not only discussing these things with his friends, but he is pleading with God. He is speaking with God in these discussions. And he's going to contrast what he's been doing with what his enemies do. So verse number 7, may my enemy be like the wicked and my opponent like the unjust. For what hope does the godless person have when he is cut off? When God takes away his life, will God hear his cry when distress comes on him? Will he delight in the Almighty? Will he call on God at all times? I will teach you about God's power. I will not conceal what the Almighty has planned. All of you have seen this for yourselves. Why do you keep up this empty talk? This is a wicked man's lot from God, the inheritance the ruthless receive from the Almighty. Even if his children increase, they are destined for the sword. His descendants will never have enough food. Those who survive him will be buried by the plague. Yet their widows will not weep for them. Though he piles up silver like dust and heaps up fine clothing like clay, he may heap it up, but the righteous will wear it. The innocent will divide up his silver. The house he built is like a moth's cocoon or a shelter set up by a watchman. He lies down wealthy, but will do so no more. When he opens his eyes, it is gone. Terrors overtake him like a flood. A storm wind sweeps him away at night. An east wind picks him up, and he is gone. It carries him away from his place. It blasts at him without mercy. While he flees desperately from its force, it claps his hands at him and scoffs at him from its place. That is Job chapter 27. Again, Job, to open up, begins speaking within this text of his desire to call out to God. Again, I'm not going to affirm what you're saying. I'm going to maintain my integrity. I'm going to cling to my righteousness. My conscience is going to be clear. With the breath that is given to me, this is what I will do. Whereas those who are wicked, they live wickedly. And what hope do they have? Because I believe Job's point here is that God's listening to me. He's taking this all in. He's observing what's going on. And my situation is different from the godless person, because the godless person might cry out to God, but guess what? God's not going to hear him. Why? Well, it's Isaiah 59, 1 and 2. In Isaiah chapter 59 and verses 1 and 2, the prophet speaks about those who might cry out to God, but he won't hear them for this reason, that your iniquities are separating you from your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you, so he does not listen. Is that Job's situation right now? Of course it's not. Job has been a righteous person. He has maintained his integrity. His conscience is clear, but not so for the godless person. The godless person is going to call upon the one whom they have been continually rejecting. And that's why their experiences in life, as are described in verses 13 through 23, are most unfortunate. Job acknowledges, and he knows that the fate of the wicked is not good. And the issue then is that, so Job knows this, his friends know this, but the issue is that his friends are misapplying the fate of the wicked to Job, because they are assuming he is wicked based upon what he is experiencing. What they don't understand is that bad things happen to both good and bad people. That's just a part of life. So Job is acknowledging, yes, I'm not arguing with you that the wicked are going to not receive this type of ill fate. Yes, I recognize that. Job recognizes this. But he also recognizes that that's not me. That's not me at all. No, I have been one who, again, has maintained integrity. I am one who has clung to my righteousness, and my conscience is not disturbed whatsoever. So don't come at me. Don't come at me and try to say that this is who I am. No, that's not who I am. We both acknowledge that this happens to wicked people, and that wicked people will be punished. But that's not my case here. And again, what I want to think about today is just the reality of just sticking to your guns. Again, there's a fine line between being stubborn and being convicted, and being being strong in those convictions. There's a fine line there, because some people, again, they'll never admit that they're wrong because they're stubborn. And to those who are outside, they're like, oh, well, that person's just being really stubborn. But that in that same situation might be somebody who's actually not guilty of these things. And people might mistake their conviction for stubbornness. At the end of the day, people might misunderstand us. People might misjudge our actions. And that's unfortunate. But again, that's just a reality of living with people who are limited. And the reality is I might make that mistake at some point. If I'm the person that's being accused and I'm sticking to my convictions and people want to say I'm being stubborn, I can't really do much about that. But I needed to take that into consideration if the roles are reversed. If I'm speaking with somebody about some mistake they made and they're sticking their convictions, at least a perceived mistake that they've made from my perspective, and they're sticking to their convictions, I don't need to be so arrogant to just demand that you need to fix this and think that I know everything about the situation. That's not true in every situation. I think there are some things that are very obvious. For example, I brought this up before, the trial of the man who drove through the Waukesha, Wisconsin Christmas parade last year. Watching his trial and observing that, he was not somebody that was just strong in his convictions. He was being stubborn. He was being arrogant. He was living in denial. It was obvious to everyone what took place on that day. So it wasn't as if people were uninformed. They were very much informed. And his resistance to taking responsibility for that was just pure arrogance and pride. But there might be times whenever things might seem one way, but really be another. Again, it's just hard sometimes. It's hard acknowledging the limits of our understanding and acknowledging the limits of our knowledge. That's why humility, I think, is a really key part of Christian character. Living as a disciple of Jesus Christ, we need to be humble. And we need to live according to level. One of the things love does, love gives the benefit of the doubt as much as it can, until we just have to, again, take into account reality and evidence and data and make a judgment. So maybe for us today, something we could take away is not just the being strong in our convictions and not just giving in to accusations, but also on the other end to be very careful with accusations, and to not jump to conclusions, and to not behave as if we know everything like Job's friends did, when in fact they were missing the picture altogether. So in every situation, regardless of what side we're on, I think Job's story helps us to learn a little bit and to be reminded of some important truths that we can implement into our lives, and as we deal with other people and seek to live together with them. I appreciate you tuning in to this reading today of Job 27. We'll be back at it again tomorrow, as we're going to be reading the Hymn of Wisdom, which is found in Job chapter 28. Should be another good read together, and I hope you'll be able to tune in for that. Again, look forward to reading with you then. Take care, and God bless.